I'm Jim Rimbach, president of CX Global Media and host of the Customer Service Weekly podcast powered by PACE, the official podcast of National Customer Service Week, where our purpose is to help you ignite CX celebration all year. Each episode, I meet with senior leaders from top brands as they share their story on how they recognize and lead the people and solutions that help their organizations to deliver a customer experience that separates their organization from others, so you can ignite your own CX celebration. And now, on to the show. Okay, CX Igniters. Today, I'm excited because we have somebody on the show today who is going to give us some different perspectives on some of the things that you may have looked at. I think we're going to add significant value to you being able to carry forth that CX celebration all year long. And this is the Customer Service Weekly that you're listening to, and it is powered by the PACE Association. And it is where we do help you to carry forth that CX celebration all year long. And you can find out more information about how to do that at customerserviceweekly.org. And because today I have Mark Slatin with Sandy Spring Bank with me. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you and I had already some good discussion prior to actually starting to hit the record button. But before we get into that, if you could, please share with our CX Igniters a little bit about you, your role, and your background experience in the organization that you work with.
Okay, sure. I am currently the Senior Vice President and Director of Client Experience at Sandy Spring Bank. We are a 153-year-old financial institution, still consider ourselves a community bank serving DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. My background, how I got here, I had a sales and sales management background, a little bit unusual. I have found a couple of those, but not too many of us that came that path over here. For about 25 years. Then I was 6 years a management consultant, and one of our clients was Sandy Spring Bank. So I worked on the outside for about 3 years, and then the CEO said, I really want to bring this resource internally. So about 8 years ago, I joined the bank as in the position I'm in now.
Now, if I had the opportunity, going back and recalling when we had first met, it was several years ago, and you spoke at an industry event that I attended, and I was really impressed. Also, when you start talking about customer experience at Sandy Spring Bank, it's something that you guys have been recognized for several years on a continuous basis for the efforts that you're putting in to improving that customer experience, and then therefore, gaining more market share, having more referral rates, having high customer experience scores. And for you, it's the contact center, but it's the branch experience. If you could give us a little bit of understanding of all those different touch points.
You're talking about what makes CX at Sandy Spring Bank work. You're describing well. So I think it does start with the culture, and the culture starts with the senior leadership and their enthusiasm for what we're doing. And the culture in a community bank is about serving the community. So our employees live and work in the community and have since they started. But as you scale, as you grow, it's harder and harder to do that experience remarkably. And so we've been very intentional about when someone comes into the organization, orientation, one of the 2 days that we have pre-COVID was in person, was client experience, completely dedicated to the client experience. So it's the way we bring employees in. It's monthly. One of the awards that we won was in 2015 for Meeting in a Box, which is a module that we set up for each manager in each department of the bank to do the same way in the same cadence each month that hits on a CX or EX topic. And that's been now 7 years that we've been doing that. So it's measuring, the voice of the client and sharing how those metrics, CX metrics, translate to ROX. It is about changing from the current design to a future design for the ideal client experience. So it's all of these things that go together. Unfortunately, there is no magic bullet to this. It just takes a lot of work.
Well, and I would dare to say, even when you started talking about that onboarding process, the due diligence that you go through in order to be able to make sure that the right people are actually getting into the organization, I'm sure goes through a lot of rigor as well. Now, you said something that several people may not be familiar with or recognize. You said ROX. What is ROX?
So that stands for, you've heard of return on investment, ROI, return on experience. That would be the client experience. So that is a way to quantify the efforts that you put into your client experience work. What are you getting out of? What's the return on those efforts? And how would you describe those? How would you begin to quantify those?
Well, but for those that are using ROI and we start talking about ROX, are there different, inputs that you're paying attention to? Is there different formulas? I mean, help us understand how that calculation may be different than what we're familiar with.
So yes, the answer is there's some differences, although at the end of the day, they should affect all of your key financial performance indicators like earnings per share or other typical financial metrics. So we would, we have some calculations that we use that connect to, for example, we can look at net promoter score. It's when many people are familiar with. So you would look at what is the profitability of those clients that move up in that, let's say they go from detractor to a passive or passive to promoter. What is the difference in profitability there? And we don't look necessarily as in the segmentation alone. We look at what that means. So how long does a promoter stay with us, and what's the average retention rate, right? Because we know that promoters stay with us longer, something on the order of 3 or 4 years longer than a detractor on average. Well, you just add up, the profitability per month over the difference in time, and you make a pretty strong business case for why we should not just be okay with clients that come on board, and plus all the other good reasons that you mentioned before, referral rate, but retention rate. And as retention translates over to, profitability over time, that's driven by how they feel, how they experience your bank. And that starts with things like sentiment. There are other metrics like operational metrics as well of what they've done with their feet that we measure as well. But that's a great example of one on the sentiment side.
Well, you had also talked about how taking all of these metrics and these analytics is an important element and component. And you even hit on the whole culture piece. And one of the things that we talk about on the Customer Service Weekly is how we actually celebrate and appreciate those that are actually delivering the experience. And we focus in on Customer Service Week, yes. However, we all know that we have to deliver the experience, or not have to, that we need to drive the passion, to give the good experience all year long, and then appreciate those that are giving it. So if you could you share a little bit about what you guys have done in order to appreciate those that are delivering the experience?
Yeah, thanks for asking, because that's really important to us, and it really has been for a long, long time. One of the things, the people on the front line, and this day and age in the world that we live in, no more important and aware of the support of the people, the tellers. We have 55 branches in this market, and people, everybody's making adjustments in this environment. Many are working from home for the first time. The majority of our workforce is working from home. Even our call center people are mostly working from home, but the tellers aren't. They still have to get up and go out to the branch, and they're exposing them potentially to the virus. So we go around, the senior leadership team, which are the executive officers, the senior vice presidents, go to the branches in a non-COVID world and deliver a goodie basket that has food and treats and gift cards and all that. In this environment, unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So the CX department actually created something called Share and Connect, which is an online chatter group within Salesforce.com, which is our CRM platform. And it's a place for anybody to post. So we would take selfies with the thank you sign. Thank you, tellers. Thank you, frontline people. and post it on Share and Connect. So not only did the tellers at the branch get to experience it, but anybody in the entire organization could look at those and just celebrate the sacrifice that those folks make.
And I would dare to say that, you talked about this piece and you talked about the adjustments, and you've probably done some other things in the past. I mean, if you think about, what you've done in the past and what you're doing now and what you're planning to do in the future, how do you foresee things shifting a little bit? You talked about, this current state, and moving to a future state design. So I'd like to hear it from a creative like yourself to see how you see this engagement going forward.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure too many people call me creative, but I'll take it. When you say this engagement, are you talking about how our go to market delivery model might be changing, or how we appreciate the front line?
More, both of them actually. I mean, please. I mean, I don't want to frame you. If you have thoughts in both, we want to hear them.
Well, I think on the appreciation side, I am hoping we come up with a vaccine and we can get back out to business and as usual at some point in the not too distant future, and we'll go back to these in-person visits. In the short run, until that happens, I guess we'll just have to be more and more intentional about doing things like Share and Connect. So there are people besides me, and I'm on something called the Employee Experience Team, which is an outgrowth of our CX work that says, how it recognize that employees are the ones primarily who drive that remarkable experience. So the employee experience is directly linked. So they have to go together, right? They're just connected to each other. The delivery model, there's a lot of speculation in banking about the need for in-person. We recently did a survey, and there's still a large percentage of our clients that once a vaccine comes back, they still want to go to the branches. Many small businesses do. They just like the comfort of making a deposit in person or doing their banking in person. And yet, having said that, it's accelerated our need to become more digital. I mean, this is not new to our bank. So we are in the process of really doing a kind of look-see at a major overhaul on how we, the tools that we can use to be more agile and flexible in what we build, so we can design around that future experience. Many old legacy systems that banks our size use, and we went from, since in the 8 years I've been here, from 3.9 billion in assets to, we're going to finish around 13 billion in assets this year. So we're no longer a small community bank, but many in our category use systems that are what I would call legacy systems that have very little flexibility for us to move. And our clients are demanding us to be able to shift. We're not being benchmarked necessarily against other banks. We're being benchmarked against the Amazons of the world who have, state-of-the-art mobile and digital solutions. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried to.
And I think for me, when as you were talking and going through that, you brought out one important point when you start talking about that experience as organizations are going through, and thinking about how do I engage my frontline better? How do I engage my customer better? How do I retain both? And in that whole, current state and future state design piece, you talked about the tool and the tool enablement. So if you start thinking about, tool, and you start thinking about going from the legacy, what are some of the things that you look at in order to say, okay, we need these elements in order for that success to happen?
Well, I think it all has to start with alignment around the client. And so in order to understand, you constantly have to go back to, what is it the client want now? What does the client want now? Because things do evolve. And so the way to do that is you have to have strong listening systems, and really collect thematic intelligence from the client, and have people in your organization that can turn that intelligence into insights, and then make recommendations on what needs to change. So that's the first step, is listen, take the intelligence you get, And that whole listening, we could spend a whole show on how to listen, and people are a lot smarter than me could help us beef up our listening systems. But we've worked really hard at it for 8 years, and it's just an ongoing process to get better and better at it. And there's that part to listen to clients, and then there's the part to watch what they do with their feet, which really speaks to the operational data. And so we take all that information, and then you've got to say, okay, what needs to change first? Because you can't boil the ocean. So what client journeys, not internal. See, that's a mistake a lot of people make. Well, we've got to do our loan processing. We got to change the way that works, or in our loan center. Actually, maybe, but it really needs to start with where's the pain or where's the opportunity for the client in their journey. And then you go back to your systems and how you build. So it's not a tool in search of a strategy, right? It's a strategy saying, what are the best tools to get there? Journey mapping is one great example of how you begin to then make the change, where you start, that's an alignment around the client and saying, from the client standpoint, what needs to change, and then which journeys are priority, and then how do we go ahead and change it to this future state? And you got to continue to reiterate that. It's like an endless cycle.
Well, and as you're talking about that, thinking about that state and that going through that, design process, and therefore being able to, move forward with the design decisions. You mentioned journey and customer journeys, and I would dare to say that everybody's customer journey has now been upended, and we're having to kind of start not from scratch. However, we're having to start with a yeoman's task on, mapping brand new journeys. And also, it's not just journeys as far as what they're doing now, kind of like what you had said, but it's journeys, not even where they're asking to go, but it's journeys on where we may have to guide them. How do you separate out when you're looking at, well, this is what they're asking for versus, well, but this is really what the need is?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think there has to be some outside in thinking, and that is, we rely on organizations that are like the mid-sized bank coalition of America, research from people like Gartner and Forrester, and those people sharing insights about what they expect the future looks like. We do look at market surveys. We did one recently with Washington Business Journal that looked at sort of a forecast looking out several years of what clients will want and need and how the market's going to change as well. So those are some of the ways we look beyond what the clients are asking for in the short term.
Well, okay. So now I'm sure very probably out of habit now, you say client. And so how come you don't say customer? What is the difference between client thinking and mindset versus customer thinking and mindset?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah. So I apologize because probably the majority of people are used to hearing customer experience or customer journeys, and we always use the word client. And the reason is there's a subtlety, but an important subtlety in the definition. A customer we view as someone who is in a buy-sell relationship with us that tends to be more transactional. A client is someone who we suspect and hope that there's a certain level of loyalty and there's more of a relationship there. There's more trust built.
Well, I think that's a very important, because I mean, talking about, what customers or clients, what they may even call themselves. It's, we want to set the right tone and put people in the right mindset, both internally and externally, so that hopefully we are capturing some of those things. I think it's brilliant. For whatever reason, you can call it Jedi mind tricks, or, you can just call it just pure authenticity and intent. Either way, I think it has some important rallying points around it, both internally and externally.
Yeah, well said. Hopefully as our employees, or we use it all the time in all our divisions, is hopefully our employees are thinking this is a client that I'm talking to here. And they really are at the end of the day. They're the ones we do this for. All the other things that we build and we talk about and we design and we fix on the back end, and the things that we count and to make sure that at the end of the day, it's the client that we're serving and they're the ones who pay our bills.
Well, and for me, I think I wanted to have you on the show for several reasons. And part of it is being that I have seen over the course of the past 10 years, there's been a merging coming together of those things that are, customer and transactional based, and those things that are more experience and client based. These things are starting to merge more and more. Folks are talking, more about the retention. They're talking about that. Even now that we're going through the COVID stuff, there's statistics, stats that have talked about how client switching has gone through the roof and has had its all-time levels where they're switching brands. So, what it's going to do, it's going to force these two things together even more, so that organizations are doing more of the work like you've been doing at Sandy Spring Bank to look at, okay, this is an entire, system, that needs to be customer centric and focused. And whether it's contact center, whether it's branch, whether it's back office, whatever have you, we have to look at it across all those different touch points because they will affect that loyalty and retention component. So if you could talk a little bit about the transition. I mean, you said you've been there for 8 years.
Yeah.
Talk about where you started versus, where it has become in regards to that merging of those two.
Well, as I look at our, our organization is a community bank, and many employees, not every employee, but many employees come to us with some degree of a client focus. We have a really good team, and that's probably true for banks like ours across the country. The question is, doing banking the way we've always done it, it just isn't going to cut it anymore. If you think about what client, it's because the client's needs have changed over that time, right? And so the idea of we can just use banking as an example, but walking into a branch to make a deposit or withdrawal, was something that people didn't think twice about. Even after mobile deposits came out, people were still going to the branches to do deposits. And for a couple of years, they were still going. So then they started to become more and more comfortable with making a mobile deposit or using their mobile device to transfer money between accounts. And that's just an example of the client's needs are changing. And like I said, banking may not be the one driving that change. It could be online shopping at Amazon or the way Southwest deals with their clients. So the bar is changing, and the expectations are higher. And this younger group of millennials and Gen Zs, and their expectations are they want it now. And by the way, they're outnumbering us baby boomers now. So we better pay attention to what their needs are, right?
Most definitely. Okay, so talking about that convergence, there's a lot of people who have come into, both the customer experience side as well as the contact center side, and they're coming together. And so there's a lot of things that they will hear, from others in regards to truisms, or best practices. Is there some things that stand out to you that, used to be, truisms or best practices that you're saying, oh no, not anymore?
Yeah, well, one of the things that comes to mind for me as you mentioned that, and I'll go back to try and think of some truisms, but is product differentiation was something we saw a lot of in the 70s and 80s. Like, how do you turn the dial up on that product? And the product in and of itself has merged with the service, right? The service and the product are all connected. Like I've got an iPhone, right? My iPhone needs to be able to connect with all these other things in order to make it work. And so it's gone from product differentiation to experience differentiation. Right? How do we differentiate from our competitors continually as we grow, as the market changes? It's going to have to be on the experience. Unless you've got a brand new widget that no one else has, and by the way, at some point they'll be able to copy it, and it won't be new anymore. The differentiation is going to have to be on that experience. So you have to do things like measure the experience now. and use that to drive what you build. You have to measure what clients are saying in the feedback. You have to watch what they're doing with their feed. You have to, as we talked about earlier, understand what's like an outside in approach to your business, and understand what's happening in the marketplace around you and where things are headed. So I think for me, if you ask truisms, it's not just about building a better product. It's not even about making a back office more efficient. It's understanding what the clients care about most, and impacting that first, right? And then making that change. And as you become larger, as you scale as an organization, it's harder and harder to do. So you need certain things in place that embed the experience into your culture.
Well, as you're talking and thinking about that whole transformation, process, or evolution, maybe is even a better word.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the rapid nature of it, like you were talking about, forced, revolution, and I don't mean from a dizziness perspective. It's like, hey, we got to accelerate this rate of, future design. I start thinking about the impact on your contact center. So if you could, can you kind of give us some insight into how the experience has been affected, with COVID, in your contact center in the branch operations?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, looking at it at a micro level of what's happened just as a result of COVID, to add insult to injury, we did an acquisition right in the middle of all this. Yeah, literally August. So we had legal day one was April 1st. Think about it. And then customer day one, day that, everything switched over for the clients, was August 17th. So literally right in the middle of it. So we just didn't have enough to think about and worry about. So we decided to do that. That was really hard. It was really hard in the call center. And so as we expected, we measured client satisfaction and the other metrics that we talked a little bit about, and they dipped. Not as bad as the previous acquisition, which tells us we learned something. But we are in the middle of, I think it'll be next week or the next week, we have a new telephone software system that's going to help us manage the call center. And one of the things we didn't have before was the option, something as simple as the option for a client to call back. So rather than wait on hold, and I'm just, I don't know, maybe I'm a control freak that I'll just stay on hold. I don't want to lose this call, but I'm not the majority. The majority of people want to have that option to call back. They want to have online chat at the call center. The software can help us accomplish that. That's just a tool. These are things as a couple of examples. So we started measuring that, and the client feedback as we surveyed them helped to inform, and it's still going on right now, how we design, what options what capabilities we have in that software tool based on what the clients are telling us they want to have that we currently don't even offer.
So I think your use and the way you're even talking about the use of that feedback is pretty advanced and as well as pretty important. And so when I start thinking about a lot of people who are coming into the roles of customer experience, contact centers, and all of that, it's really important to them to make sure they're focusing on the right things. So what would be one or two good pieces of advice you would provide to those folks?
On what to focus on? It all starts with listening. So it may seem really simple, but take a look at how you're listening to clients who are calling into the call center, and it's not just a referendum on how well the particular agent is handling the calls. That's one piece of data. It's why are they calling in the first place? That would be a CX question, right? What's the reason for your call? If you're calling because you're switching channels because you couldn't get something done online or on your phone, then you're jumping channels into the call center, which is, by the way, going back to ROX, a much more expensive way for us to do business and a pain in the butt for clients, right? So let's understand why they're calling. Ask those questions. Make sure when you're asking clients, you're getting good feedback. Right, you're asking the right questions. If you have a one question survey, it may not be enough. There are times and places for a one question survey, like a pulse survey, but make sure you're asking and then say, okay, based on the operational data, if we have an abandon rate that's really high, call wait time that's high, watch the trends, understand, because it's all upstream. The reasons for the call, people don't wake up in the morning and say, I cannot wait to call the call center at Sandy Spring Bank. There are a few, right? There are a few. I'll give you that. That is the highlight of their day. But the large majority of clients don't wake up wanting to call. That means that I heard someone say once, the call customer service happens when the experience is broken, right? So that's people are calling in, not because they want to, because something else happened, with the few exceptions I was teasing about. So make sure you're asking the right questions. Prioritize which one, because you can't boil the oceans. Prioritize and see what happens. Measure again, and then go after the second thing. That would be my approach. Just continue. It's a continuous cycle.
Well, Mark, I've enjoyed meeting with you today and listening to your unique perspectives. And obviously, they're working because Sandy Spring Bank has been recognized for the experience that they deliver for many, many years. And obviously, you've been a big part of that because it's happened during your tenure. Mark, how can CX Igniters get in touch with you?
Well, if anybody wanted to call or email, my email address is mslatin, Slatin, at sandyspringbank.com. And my number is 301-717-8959. They're welcome to call. Would love to talk and help any way I can.
Mark Slatin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us to all ignite that CX celebration and carry it all year long. Thank you for listening to the Customer Service Weekly podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, follow, and share the Customer Service Weekly podcast and register for a free membership at customerserviceweekly.org to get the latest updates on how you can help ignite the CX spirit everywhere.